I have heard nothing on 8754. I am now returning to Portishead Radio for advice.
Donald Crowhurst was an electronics engineer with a small business in Somerset. In October 1968, he left home to sail around the world alone. 9 men embarked on the Sunday Times yacht race in search of fame and adventure. Donald Crowhurst never returned.
It doesn't need so much what?
String.
Snow. I shouldn't think string is a very good thing when you're going round Cape Horn, actually.
In April 1968, the Sunday Times announced the first non-stop, single-handed round-the-world yacht race. Even Sir Francis Chichester had gone ashore during his triumphant voyage the year before. Crowhurst was the last to leave on October the 31st, the day the deadline expired. The spotlight was on Crowhurst from the outset. Not only was he the last to leave, but he'd become a local celebrity. BBC Bristol gave him £250, a film camera and a tape recorder to make a record of his voyage.
I feel a bit of a Charlie, actually, sitting here with this BBC tape recorder, whirring away, taking down everything, I have to say, faithfully and revealing it for pure and absolute nonsense. I feel like somebody who's been given a tremendous opportunity to impart a message, some profound observation that will save the world.
Back home in Bridgewater, Crowhurst's wife had 4 young children to bring up and a rambling house to maintain. Their only income was to have been from sales of Crowhurst Navigator, a radio receiver that acted as a device for navigation. Crowhurst was a radio wizard who loved inventing gadgets. The Navigator was the least fanciful of many.
I can remember him sitting for hours on end in the shed, surrounded by electronic devices, an oscilloscope and wearing headphones, totally absorbed in making, rearranging, designing electronic devices and radio devices. It was something that completely intrigued him, and he would often talk to us as children about radio waves and how they spread out like ripples from a pond.
Crowhurst had invented not only the Navigator, but also a computerised safety mechanism for the yacht. He undertook the voyage in the hope that the publicity would promote his ailing electronics business. The house was remortgaged to finance the trip, and he persuaded his backer, a successful local caravan dealer, to stand by him until the voyage was over.
This really was an exciting venture, and I'm not an adventurous person so far as I'm concerned, but it was interesting and compelling to join in, even at a distance.
I feel I've done a reasonably good day's work today. Filming, recording, looking after the boat and navigation, cooking, and of course, by far the most important event, establishing my contact with Portishead Radio, which is the crowning achievement of today.
I was a radio officer at Portishead Radio during the time that Donald Crowhurst was supposed to be going around the world. I took a lot of messages from him, in Morse code, of course, because we were what we call a WT station, HFWT, high frequency wireless telegraphy. We merely passed his signals to the various people, to his agent and also to his wife. We sat with earphones on, took our signals and typed them out. But with him, because he was a special case, we would perhaps type it out and take it up and phone it through to his wife.
It was a local story, and we were very much looking forward to getting frequent progress reports from heroic Crowhurst as he went around the world. This is what race entrants do. They're radioing back positions, what's happening to them. We got virtually nothing. At very long intervals, Donald would send back a 6-word telegram to Portishead Radio, which his agent didn't like because he wanted success stories to push on to us and to all the papers. So the agent had to do his best with 6 words, turn it into 40 words and hope that that was it. But we never really knew what he was doing. We never really knew where he was.
I was employed by the Sunday Times to follow the 10 contestants in the Round the World yacht race in 1968, and indeed to calculate their relative speeds each week in comparison with Chichester's famous voyage the previous year. Now, Donald Crowhurst, of course, was the last to leave on the 31st of October, and he did very, very poor speeds for the first week or two in what was generally rather poor weather. But what worried me about Donald Crowhurst was the vagueness of the information we got from him. And then suddenly, in early December, we had this claim for a world record for a single-handed yachtsman, 243 miles in one day. Well, that made me suspicious, bearing in mind he'd only been averaging 50 miles a day, roughly, up until that time.
Crowhurst's claim worried both Captain Rich and Sir Francis Chichester. But the world continued to follow his circumnavigation. It was only at the end of the voyage, which, curiously, lasted 243 days, that this moment was seen as a turning point.
It was at that particular stage that things started to change, and indeed when I reconstructed his route sometime later, once the logbooks had been brought back to the United Kingdom, in fact it was from that period on that we had 2 voyages, if you like. The real voyage, which took him down to the Falklands roughly and back again, and the fraudulent voyage, which indeed he pretended to go around the world.
Despite his doubts, Craig Rich continued to report Crowhurst's apparent progress to the Sunday Times. His unease about the boat's capabilities was not without precedent. Crowhurst's irrepressible optimism had obscured a sense of concern that had existed right from the start.
I was 8 years old at the time, but I think all of us children felt it, a sense of the tension as well as the excitement. There was obvious excitement. We were going away to the seaside and we were going to see my father set off to sail around the world. But at the same time, we could feel the tension and the haste that was involved. We could see everything in disarray in the boat.
It was absolute chaos. The inside of his trimaran resembled nothing less than a car boot sale warehouse. It was piled up with electronic bits, with wire, with equipment, with tins, with bags, with ropes, with everything. It really was total chaos, and it never seemed to get any better.
The boat wasn't ready, and there was the tension and the sense of something approaching doom that was in the air. There was this indefinable feeling that there was something terribly wrong and that my father was involved in something unstoppable.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this cruise. The boat has been extremely well behaved, very exhilarating to sail. Everything's quite satisfactory, in fact.
Crowhurst kept up the nonchalant tone of his tape recordings throughout the journey. But his logbooks, in which he recorded his authentic feelings alongside his navigation, told quite another story.
One of the striking things that the logbook shows, the difference that developed from quite an early stage in the voyage between what my father was prepared to tell other people about what was happening on the boat and what he knew himself the situation was. At the 15th of November, he recorded that he had no electrics, that the hatches were leaking, letting water into the float, that the sails were incorrectly cut and that the shrouds were chafing, and also that he had no method of pumping because a crucial bit of tubing had been left behind in the rush at Teignmouth. So with that great list of problems in his mind, in November the 15th, he booked a call to my mother to say that everything was okay. Nothing at all about the incredible difficulties he was having with the boat.
What courses are open? Either I abandon the non-stop attempt, or I go on with it. If I go on, I have an equal chance of making the trip or drowning. Claire would think the risk was unacceptable, and my first duty is to her. On the whole, it must be regarded as unacceptable for a married man with a moderately large family. The strain on poor Claire would be terrible.
I've been alone now for very nearly 2 months. Not that I'm depressed or feeling sorry for myself by any means, but there is a spirituality about this place and about the time, Christmas, that does tend to make one a little bit melancholy.
Obviously, the boat wasn't in very good condition, we know that. But nevertheless, he continued to plug southwards down the Brazilian coast here, while telling everybody he was off around the Roaring Forties. But that's all we knew at that stage because he stopped sending radio messages. When he said dead transmissions when possible, he was leading up to the fact that he was going to go out of radio communication, because if he kept in radio contact going across the Southern Ocean, the only way he got his messages back is through the local, and I use that in inverted commas, radio station, which would have been Wellington. He was operating through Buenos Aires because he was close enough and in radio distance of that. But he couldn't send anything through Wellington because, in fact, he wasn't there.
He did give this warning that he thought he might have to go into radio silence. But the psychological isolation was that much more complete. He could hear messages coming in, and yet he had imposed the situation upon himself of non-communication, of being, as it were, speechless.
Keeping a sort of watch on sails by night, alone, the rigging sighs a sigh of cosmic sorrow. For weeping doves that die, maybe tomorrow on 12.7 by 10 to the 5th irradiated olive trees. A sigh to fill man's soul with melancholy. Waves sweep away my melancholy. My footstool's a 10-pound case of rice. To the northeast, 2.5 by 10 cubed miles. 250 by 10 cubed babies will slowly die, too weak to fuss. Carbohydrate deficiency, they tell us, on 15.402 megahertz.
It's clear that he's thinking of himself as a component sitting in the middle of the boat, which is itself acting as a kind of radio receiver and picking up these messages about the world and about the state of the world, which is one of irreparable sorrow and damage. And it clearly reflects how he was thinking about his own predicament and the boat itself being unmanageable and unsuitable for a round-the-world voyage.
What you want to know, Mikey, is where am I? What am I doing? And will I describe the actual hell of doing it? I'm driving. drunk. You silly old circum, you're as drunk as a circumnavigator could be. It is a terrible thing, but I think I'll just have another little swig of this butter ale. Ah!
In theory, then, he would have gone all the way across here, around the world, up past New Zealand, and here he is coming in towards Cape Horn. And this, of course, means that he's now back, in theory, close to his actual position.
His fake journey had now joined up with his real one, and he was free to speak again.
As far as Don Crowhurst was concerned, he would have used that particular switch, 12 megs, I would have worked him on. That time when he told me he had just come round Cape Horn. It would have been about 5 o'clock one morning. He would have used a 12 meg frequency. I would have answered him with that key down. His call sign was Mike Zulu Uniform Whiskey. I would have got a message form expecting him to send a telegram, Yeah, the old typewriters, good, solid, very hard-working, stand a lot of hard wear, that. But instead of sending a telegram, he just told me that he had come round Cape Horn. And I would have gone back on the key here, Mike MZ Uniform Whiskey, his call sign. I would have said, received, thank you, and we'll pass information on.
There was a tremendous excitement when we heard that when his radio silence was broken, we heard that he was returning home, and everyone was smiling, and we just thought it was wonderful.
Crowhurst emerged from radio silence to find that he was bound to win the prize for the fastest circumnavigation, and that his logbooks would be scrupulously examined.
I was determined to solve the problem if it took the rest of my life. Half an hour later, I had set up the basic equations and seen the pattern. 3 days later, I understood everything in nature, in myself, in all religion, in politics, in atheism, agnosticism, communism, and systems. I knew everything from Julius Caesar to Mao Zedong. I had a complete set of answers to the most difficult problems now facing mankind. I had arrived in the cosmos while contemplating the navel of an ape.
He was at a very extreme psychological point at that time, and he had received the message that there were thousands of people waiting to cheer him home on his arrival at Teignmouth.
His homecoming reception threatened to be as huge as Sir Francis Chichester's the previous year.
Sirens are sounding, people are cheering and waving, planes are circling round, swooping down over him. This is a moment of tremendous excitement and exhilaration out here.
If I stipulate of my own free will that by learning to manipulate the space-time continuum, man will become God and disappear from the physical universe as we know it, I am providing the system with an impulse. If my solution is rooted in the mathematical requirements of a solution, it is correct. Then I am very close to God and should, by the methods I claim are available, move at last to prophecy. Let's have a go. The choice is simply this. Do we go on clinging to the idea that God made us, or realize that it lies within our power to make God?
He wanted to convey a truth about the way in which an intellect can identify with what's eternally true, with mathematics, and that in that situation that individual survival didn't really matter.
The system is shrieking out this message at the top of its voice. Why does no one listen? I am listening anyway.
This is Mike Zulu Uniform Whiskey. Mike Zulu Uniform Whiskey calling Baldock Radio. Hello Baldock, hello Baldock, hello Baldock. Mike Zulu Uniform Whiskey.
It must have been a very ironic situation that, having pretended for so long that he was unable to make transmissions when he really did desperately need to make a telephone call to my mother, perhaps to make a confession, that he was unable to because the transmitter began to fail. He did try desperately hard to try and make the radio telephone link work, but without success.
apart from the odd gale, it'll be a downhill run to England. No problems at all, I shouldn't think. Anyway, I certainly feel as though the voyage is over, although I've got about 2,000 miles or so to go. Barring catastrophes, the whole thing's sewn up at this stage. I feel as though I could realise all those ambitions I nurtured as a boy, like playing cricket for England, you know, feel on top of the world, tremendously fit. And I feel in tremendous shape. I've never felt so.
These were the last words he recorded. On June the 23rd, his tapes ran out.
Really, the first news that we had that things were so terrible, my mother took us all upstairs and we sat on a bed, and she said that the boat had been found and that my father wasn't on it, and at which point she began to cry, and we were just stunned. We didn't know what it meant. We knew that there was a search still on, so we felt quite optimistic that he might be found. And when the truth about what had happened, when the logbooks finally began to be studied and people began to realise what had happened, it was very difficult for my mother to explain to us.
Nature does not allow God to sin any sins except one. That is the sin of concealment. This is the terrible secret of the torment of the soul, needed by a natural system to keep trying. He has perpetrated this sin on the tormented.
I think in a way what he did right at the end of the voyage was to make the boat itself a kind of transmitter, a way of transmitting his confession about what had happened on the voyage, and his philosophical message, the impulse that he felt he'd received, that he wanted the boat to transmit to the rest of the world, even after his death.
There can only be one perfect beauty. That is the great beauty of truth. No man may do more than all that he is capable of doing. The perfect way is the way of reconciliation. I am what I am, and I see the nature of my offence.
Right at the end of the logbook, the writing reaches a kind of conclusion, and he writes the words, "It is finished, it is the mercy," and says that he will resign the game, and gives the time that he'll do so, which is the time just shortly after the time of the last messages. And the most likely conclusion from that is when he had decided to die. It's just possible that there is some other meaning, but from the psychological movement of those last few pages, he clearly regarded his struggle as coming to an end at that point, and that's where the logbook ends.